Welcome back, everyone. We are back with another film analysis video. I know it's taken a while for me to get this one out. I've been promising it for months, but it's finally here. Today we are going to be analyzing 1953's Peter Pan. I absolutely love the book, but we're not going to be talking about the book today. We're not going to be talking about any other film besides the 1953 cartoon. I can't wait to break it down with you guys today. These videos take a long time for me to make. That's why I kept putting it off for so long. So if you guys like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends to help boost this channel in the algorithm so I can provide more of these videos for you guys. And as always, we will go through the characters first and break down the archetypes that those characters represent. Then I'm going to go over the locations in the film and how those symbolize different aspects of the human psyche. And then we will do our scene-by-scene analysis, going through every scene in the film and breaking down the symbolism and hopefully connecting you guys deeper to this absolutely fantastic film. These early Disney films, especially the early ones, are much deeper than people remember. So I hope these videos help connect you guys to these films in a deeper way. So with that all out of the way, let's get into the analysis. So let's start by analyzing the characters that appear in this film. Let's start with Peter Pan. He's not our protagonist, he's not our main character. That is Wendy, but he's the character in which the film is named after. Thus, I think we should start with him. So Peter Pan represents the pure eternus, which means the eternal child. So it's a very interesting archetype. It pops up in many, many stories, but it's not exactly a positive archetype. And Peter Pan is also a trickster archetype. So he plays tricks all throughout the film, especially on Captain Hook. But Carl Jung once said that the trickster or the fool is the precursor to the savior archetype. So you need to be a fool before you can learn anything. You think about this in everyday life, right? Like if you want to learn something new, and if it's truly new to you, you have to be bad at it. You have to be a fool. You have to fumble around and look stupid doing it for a while until you get good at it. It's the same thing with anything in life. You have to suck at it before you're good at it. So you have to be willing to be the fool. So that plays into this story quite a bit. And I think if there's one story that kind of exemplifies that fact, that you need to be a fool before you can be a savior, it's the Peter Pan story. So like I said, he's a little bit of an odd character. He's both good and bad because he isn't fully developed, and he is part of the problem with Wendy, as we'll see here in a second. But this is what Peter Pan symbolizes. Peter Pan represents the eternal child who refuses to grow up, symbolizing the part of the psyche that desires freedom from responsibility. Psychologically, he reflects the tension between staying in a state of carefree fantasy and the inevitable need to mature and face the realities of life. His avoidance of time/death reveals a deep-rooted fear of growing old and losing autonomy. So Peter Pan is a complicated character. He actually reflects Captain Hook in a lot of ways. Captain Hook has basically the same fears that Peter Pan has throughout this film. He's running away from the same thing. He's running away from death and time, but in a different way. So we'll talk about that more when we get to Captain Hook. But Peter Pan, just remember, while he is one of the good characters because he's the hero that saves the day at the end, he's also one of the things that's holding Wendy back. So we'll talk about Wendy next. So Wendy, darling, she is our heroine. She's our protagonist. She's the main character. She's the maiden and the mother. She kind of fulfills that role more towards the end of the film, but she is the one that we're supposed to be placing ourselves in her shoes. So she's kind of our self character. Now, the self is a complicated idea. The self it's supposed to be unity. It's the unified factors of the psyche. So you don't actually become the self ever in your life. You're kind of constantly striving towards that. But the self is kind of the characters in stories in which you're placing yourself within, right? You're going through the character growth with that character. So even though the film's titled Peter Pan, and you might think of him as the main character, some of you have maybe even forgotten what Wendy's name was, right? So Wendy is our protagonist. That's the self. That's the one who we're supposed to be placing ourselves within. Peter Pan is just an aspect inside Wendy's head, which we'll see in a second here. Peter Pan's not real, but he's also more real than real, which I'll explain in a minute. Wendy embodies the transition from childhood innocence to adulthood responsibility. She represents the feminine desire for nurturing and structure, struggling between the allure of eternal youth, which is Neverland, and the pull towards maturity, family, and the acceptance of real-world duties. So yeah, Wendy is our protagonist, and we will see how she develops throughout the story when we get there. Our next character that we need to cover is Captain Hook, who represents the shadow. He is the tyrant, and he's also the fear of death. That's another thing that he represents. So Captain Hook represents the shadow side of Peter Pan's eternal youth, the bitter, resentful adult who fears time and death, embodied by the crocodile. Psychologically, he symbolizes the dark aspect of the psyche that becomes consumed by vengeance, fear, and failure to integrate realities of life such as aging and mortality. So throughout the story, Captain Hook is running away from death. He's running away from time. I'm going to explain that more while we walk through the story, but that exactly mirrors what Peter Pan is running from. They're just doing it at different stages in their life, right? Peter Pan's a youth, and Captain Hook is an old man. So it's something to remember when we get deeper into this film. The next character we need to cover is Tinkerbell, who is the anima. She represents the anima, both, I believe, of Peter Pan and Wendy. Now, it's a little bit complicated, but I'll flesh that out more in a second here. She's also a trickster archetype. She plays quite a few tricks throughout the film. Tinkerbell represents the anima, the emotional, instinctual, and often irrational aspect of Peter's unconscious. Her jealousy and loyalty reflect the emotional forces that can both inspire and hinder the individual. Psychologically, she symbolizes the unpredictable emotional drives that influence actions and relationships. So it can be a little bit difficult sometimes to understand anima versus animus, but the way to break it down in simple terms is the anima is the feminine aspects of the male psyche, whereas the animus is the masculine aspects of the female psyche. Now, anima also means in Latin soul, breath, and spirit, whereas animus in Latin also means mind, spirit, or will. So there's a slight difference there, but basically Tinkerbell is that repressed feminine aspect of Peter Pan's psyche, and Peter Pan, in some ways, is the animus of Wendy's psyche. So it gets a little bit complicated there. You have, layers within layers there, but I'll explain that more as we get deeper into the analysis, but we need to move on to the next character. Next up, we got to cover Mr. Smee, my favorite character in the whole film. He's hilarious. I believe it's the same voice actor that plays the rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. I'm like 99% sure that that's the case, but Mr. Smee is the fool, and he's also the servant to Captain Hook. Servant is almost not it's almost not a great word, because he's almost a mother to Captain Hook throughout the film. He's very motherly-like, and we'll see that as we work through the film. But Mr. Smee represents the fool, the well-meaning but bumbling servant to Hook. Psychologically, he reflects the part of the psyche that avoids conflict and responsibility by following others' orders without reflection. He is the innocent side of the incompetence that can both enable chaos, Hook, and provide comic relief from the seriousness of life. So Mr. Smee is a good and bad character. Obviously, he's following an evil man, he's following a tyrant, but he's kind of under his shoe. He's almost like Wormtail to Voldemort. You can kind of see that as almost the same relationship, right? He's bad, but he's almost like in a cowardly or weak way bad. You almost feel bad for the guy. So Mr. Smee provides comic relief throughout the whole film, and he's probably my favorite character. He's the character that I laugh at the most throughout the film. So next up, we have to talk about the Lost Boys, who represent the orphan or the eternal child. So they're very interesting because they actually mirror the pirates. They're like the younger versions of the pirates. If the Lost Boys continue to be Lost Boys, they will eventually become pirates, and you'll see that explicitly reflected in the last scene of the film, which we'll go over. But the Lost Boys represent the orphaned child archetype, symbolizing individuals who are disconnected from family, responsibility, and structure. Psychologically, they embody the desire to remain in a state of eternal youth, living freely but without direction or purpose. They reflect the psyche's retreat into fantasy to avoid the demands of the adult world. So the Lost Boys are kind of like the Mr. Smees to Peter Pan. Peter Pan is obviously representative of the eternal youth, right? The eternal child. And then the Lost Boys are kind of like almost worse versions of that. If you're not the leader and you're a follower, you're almost a worse version. So the Lost Boys, again, we'll touch on them as we move through the film. Next up, we have Tiger Lily, who is the warrior and the damsel. So in the way that she represents the warrior, she's connected to the Indians, or the Aborigines. They're supposed to be called Aboriginal or First Nations people, but in the film, they're called Indians. So if I stick with that term, it's just because that's what's used throughout the film. But she is the warrior, which is what the Indians represent. But she's also the damsel, because she's kind of the plot piece in the film. She doesn't really have any lines, but she's the one who gets taken away, and then the heroes have to go rescue her. And she's mainly a plot piece, but Tiger Lily represents the warrior maiden, a figure of nobility, strength, and courage. Psychologically, she symbolizes the noble, instinctual aspects of the self that are threatened by chaos, Hook, but can be protected by the hero, Peter. Her rescue reflects the psyche's attempt to integrate and protect its most noble primal qualities. So we'll see that throughout the story, that the interactions with the Indians are supposed to be this reintegration of ancient or past knowledge. You'll see this many times throughout many stories, that the hero will have to often confront something ancient. Maybe they'll go to a ruin, or they'll find an ancient artifact and they have to engage with them. They have to find some wisdom from it. Or they find people. They find like an old sage, an old man, some old wizard. Or maybe, in this case, the Indians, which represent kind of the older America, right? It's old tradition. It's the primal qualities. And you need to reintegrate those as the hero before you make the final confrontation with the shadow. So we'll get more into that when we talk about the Indian scenes. Next up, we have the crocodile, who represents time and death. Basically straight up. I know it's weird for a crocodile to represent that, but it's a crocodile with a clock in its belly that's constantly ticking, and that ticking always sets Captain Hook off. So the crocodile represents time and death, the inevitable forces that pursue Hook and ultimately all individuals. Psychologically, it is the ticking clock that no one can escape, symbolizing the unconscious awareness of mortality that haunts those who, like Hook, try to evade the natural progression of life. So there are people who try to avoid death, who try to cheat it, who try to live forever. And those characters pop up quite a bit throughout fiction, right? And they're usually bad characters. Usually your protagonist is not trying to achieve eternal life. It's kind of like with the first film in the Harry Potter series, where Harry Potter is sort of after the Philosopher's Stone, but not really. But Voldemort wants it because he wants eternal life. He wants to come back. But the only reason why Harry can get the Philosopher's Stone is because he doesn't want it, right? So that same theme is reflected here a little bit. So next up, we have the Darling parents, Mr. and Mrs. Darling, who represent the archetypes of the good mother and the good father. The Darling parents represent the parental archetypes, providing the stable, nurturing environment from which the children venture out. Psychologically, they symbolize the forces of order, responsibility, and the secure framework of society that allows children to grow and explore, but eventually to return and mature into responsible adults. So the mother and father archetypes are pretty similar, especially across these Disney films. If we look back at Sleeping Beauty, when I covered that, the mother and father archetype in that kind of play the same role. They're there in the beginning and they're there at the end. They're a place of comfort for the hero to start at, but then they have to go out from and explore the world, and then they usually come back with their reintegrated lessons as like a new full person, as a full self, right? They come back to where they came from. Next up, we have the mermaids, which is the seductive anima, or the temptress. The mermaids embody the seductive anima, representing the alluring but dangerous pull of fantasy and emotional indulgence. Psychologically, they symbolize the temptation to lose oneself in desire, playfulness, and the undergrounded emotional realm, which can threaten one's focus and purpose if not properly integrated. So the mermaid scene, I'm going to talk more about this when I get to that scene. It's a very short scene, but yeah, these temptresses, very, very interesting point in the film. I'm going to save that for when I get to that point in the film. We got a couple more characters to go over. Next up, we got John Darling, which is the rational child. He is the intellectual. He's the smart kid. John represents the intellectual or rational side of childhood. He embodies the more logical, rule-following approach to life, in contrast to Peter's spontaneous and emotional nature. Psychologically, he reflects the developing conscious mind, one that is attempting to impose order and reason even in fantastical situations like Neverland. John's glasses and behavior signify an early form of responsibility, a foreshadowing of the adult's ability to make sense of the world. So John is kind of the smartest character in the film. He's always trying to present a rational conclusion to things that are going on around him. There's at one point in the film, he says that he wants to go see the Aborigines. And little Michael, who we'll talk about in a second here, he says, and the Indians too. And it's just a funny little moment there, but it kind of reflects that John is kind of our intelligent character. He's the one who's approaching things with a rational mindset. So next up we have Michael, which is the innocent child. He's the youngest one. Michael represents the innocent and trusting aspects of childhood. He is the youngest and most naive, reflecting pure, unguarded joy of exploration without the self-awareness or fear that comes with age. Psychologically, he embodies the innate curiosity and openness of the child who still sees the world through a lens of wonder and trust. So Michael is our innocent one. He's the one that hasn't grown up yet. He doesn't have any fears. He's actually the one who kind of finds the Indians first because he's just wandering out. So he's a funny little character. Next up, we have Nana the dog, who fulfills the caretaker archetype. Nana the dog, who acts as the darling children's nursemaid, symbolizes the caregiver archetype, representing loyalty, protection, and nurturing. Psychologically, she reflects the animal instinct for caretaking, providing a layer of emotional security and affection. Her presence in the nursery adds an element of grounded, unconditional support, reminding the children and the viewer of the primal, loyal love that forms the foundation of their family life. So Nana's a pretty sweet character. She's not in it that much, but there are a couple funny moments with her in the first couple scenes, but she's not in the film a ton. We have two more characters to talk about, but they're not really characters, they're groups of characters. So the next one is the pirates, the crew of pirates. These are the Shadow's minions, kind of like the hyenas for Scar, or those weird little goblin characters from Maleficent. Every Shadow archetype, almost, in the Disney canon, almost all of them have minions, and those will be kind of their underlings who do their dirty work for them, and the ones that they can bully a bit, right? So in this film, it's the pirates. The pirates, as Hook's crew, represent the collective Shadow, the chaotic and destructive forces that serve a malevolent leader, Hook. Psychologically, they symbolize the aspects of the psyche that follow darker impulses without reflection or independent thought. As an extension of Hook's shadow, they reflect the destructive, immature urges that undermine order and personal growth. And the last group of characters that I'll talk about today is the Indians. The Indians in Peter Pan are archetypically linked to the concept of the noble savage and the warrior. They embody untamed nature, primal honor, and courage. Psychologically, they reflect the raw instinctual aspects of the self that maintain a code of honor and respect. Their connection with nature represents the integration of primal instincts with higher values, contrasting with the more chaotic and destructive forces of Hook and the pirates. So that kind of wraps up our character list, and that should give you guys kind of a better understanding of the archetypes that are represented in the characters. So now we're going to look into the symbolism of the locations in Peter Pan, because there are some very unique and interesting locations that represent different aspects of the psyche. So the first one that I want to talk about is the nursery, which I touched on earlier. That's the darling family home. It represents a safe haven and order. The nursery represents the individual's starting point, where early development is safe and grounded by the family structure. Leaving it is an act of pushing away from safety to confront the unknown. So you guys might remember in my Lion King analysis video, we talked about how the Pride Lands were kind of this for Simba. They were where it was safe. And then he could go out into the hunting grounds, he can go out to the watering hole, he can go places on his own and explore, and he's not supposed to go there. He's supposed to stay where the light shines, right? I believe that's exactly what his father tells him. That's exactly what Mufasa says. Everywhere where the light shines, that's our kingdom, our domain. Everywhere where it doesn't, that is outside, that's chaos, that's the unknown. Don't go out there, that's not safe. And of course Simba goes out there and explores, right? And he goes on his journey, and it's the same thing here with the darling home. Now, there's also Neverland. So the Neverland is kind of the opposite. It's chaos. It's the unconscious. It's the fantasy realm. Neverland represents the mind's attempt to escape the burdens of reality by indulging in fantasy. While it offers freedom and play, it also represents the dangers of stagnation and refusal to grow or accept time. So I'm sure many of us remember what it's like to be a kid, or maybe you're still a kid watching this video. If you are, hey, good for you for clicking on a video that's so long and intense. But if we remember what we were like as kids, we all remember not wanting to grow up. We all remember, going through the toy aisles as kids, and that's the only aisle in the store that you cared about. Or you go through the candy aisle and you go, oh, one day I'm going to buy all the candy that I want as an adult, and I'll eat it all day. I'll eat it for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. And then you try doing that at 20 years old and you just throw up and you're like, oh, I'm never going to do that again. But as a kid, you have this idea of what adult life is like, what life is like, right? And it's fictionalized. It kind of blends in with your imagination. I remember, because I'd watched Star Wars so much as a kid, I remember like every time we would go to Walmart or go to a grocery store and just making that walk up to the doors, I'd feel like Anakin going up the stairs to execute Order 66. I would just imagine it in my head, like I'm Anakin, and then going through the stores, marching around, and you're living in this fantasy realm, but it's not reality. You're kind of overlaying it on top of reality, and you use it as an escape. So I'm sure many of us can relate to Neverland, and yeah, we're going to talk more about that in a second here. The Jolly Roger, Captain Hook's ship. Many of you may not remember that it's actually called the Jolly Roger, but this is the Shadow's lair. This is tyranny and imprisonment. That is what Captain Hook's ship represents. It's kind of like Scar, how he has those caves where all the hyenas hang out with him. Maleficent has her castle that looks very, very, beaten down, and it's dark and gloomy, and there's like green clouds around it. That's the Shadow's lair. The Jolly Roger is the psyche's shadow realm, where unresolved issues of control, fear, and resentment live. It is the opposite of freedom, a place where one is mentally trapped by fear or bitterness, unable to integrate these darker elements. So you can see Captain Hook's ship as imprisonment because, the pirates, they're kind of under Hook. They can't really do what they want. They have to follow all the orders, and Hook has a temper on him. Out of all the shadow characters in the Disney films, I think the one with the highest temper is probably Captain Hook. So he's always on edge, and nobody in his crew can actually do what they want. But if you're in Neverland, you can explore and have fun, and there's freedom. But Hook's ship represents prison. Then we have the lagoon, the Mermaid's Lagoon, and this represents seduction and the unconscious and illusion. This often comes up. This is often what mermaids represent across all of fiction. They represent the seductive or elusive nature. So the lagoon is a space of emotional temptation where fantasy becomes so intoxicating it risks drawing one away from the conscious, grounded self. It warns of the dangers of indulging too deeply in ungrounded desires. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get around to the mermaids in the lagoon, but it's a very, very interesting trope in fiction. Next up, we have Hangman's Tree, which is Peter Pan's hideout. This represents the trickster's domain and the hidden self. The hideout symbolizes the interior space where an individual avoids confronting the demands of reality. It is a place to hide, to indulge in the persona of eternal youth, but ultimately it is an avoidance of psychological integration. So, I know many people watching this probably had a hideout as a kid, somewhere where they would go to hide away. Maybe, you don't want to play with your friends anymore, or maybe you just don't want to be in the house anymore. Maybe mom and dad are fighting. Maybe you don't want to play with your siblings. Maybe you don't want to go to school. You don't want to go to summer camp. There could be a bunch of reasons why you would run away to your hideout. Maybe you had, a tree house. I wasn't lucky enough to have that growing up, but maybe some of you did. I did have an acreage where my grandma lived that was only about 5 minutes away from my house. So just about every single weekend, I would spend time at my grandma's acreage, and she had, I think, between 6 and 8 acres. It wasn't a huge property, but it was enough for me to explore and have fun and let my imagination run wild. So for me, that was kind of like Neverland, and it was also kind of like my little Hangman's Tree, my little hideout. So whenever my parents were going through a bad situation, I needed to get away, I'd run away to grandma's house. So for me, that's how I link Hangman's Tree to my own life, and I'm sure many of you guys can as well. Next up, we have Skull Rock, which is death and confrontation with mortality. Skull Rock is the part of the unconscious mind that forces individuals to confront death. It highlights the psyche's deep fear of the unknown and the ultimate end, which is often denied or repressed. So yeah, obviously Skull Rock represents death, being a big skull of a rock. I think that's pretty obvious. But this is where we get several confrontations with death, which I will go through once we get to that scene. Next up, we have the Indian camp, which is the noble, savage, and primal wisdom. This is where the hero goes to find the primal wisdom and reintegrate it into themselves. The Indian camp represents the psyche's ability to channel instinctual energies in a noble and structured way. It reflects the part of the self that can harness primal strength and wisdom without falling into chaos or repression. So yeah, we'll talk about the Indian camp when we get to it. Again, I'm using that word Indian because that's the word that's used in Peter Pan. I know they're indigenous people or First Nations, but I will have to tread around that scene a little bit carefully. When you go and you watch Peter Pan on Disney Plus, you get a little pop-up there that says this film was insensitive to people back in the day, and it's because of this scene and a certain song that's sung during this scene. But we'll get to that when we get to it. We got a couple more locations to cover. The next one being Big Ben, or the clock tower, which is time, which we see at the beginning of the film and we see it at the end of the film. So time has a big influence on this film all throughout. Both characters, both Hook and Peter Pan, are kind of running away from time. Big Ben represents the inevitable confrontation with time, the force that Peter Pan avoids. It is the anchor to reality, reminding the psyche that no matter how much it tries to escape time and responsibility, will always catch up. We also have London, which is a little bit similar to the clock tower. I made the distinction here just to provide even another level of detail, but you could see these as the same. London obviously represents order, civilization. London is the goal of the psychological integration, the place where the individual must return after exploring the unconscious, Neverland. It symbolizes the return to structure, growth, and the conscious acceptance of adulthood. So when we come back to London at the end of the story, it's kind of our conclusion, and our characters have come full circle and have fully integrated the lessons that they need to learn, and they become that full self at the end. So that concludes all of the locations. So now we will get into the scene-by-scene analysis. So the opening shot, we get Peter Pan, the title, and we also get this opening line of narration that reads, "All this happened before, and it will all happen again, but this time it happened in London." So this is a nice theme that we see in a lot of these earlier Disney movies, that they kind of set up the story in almost the same way every time. They almost say, this is a story that happens over and over again. It's the same thing with Alice in Wonderland. It's the same thing with Pinocchio. These are eternal stories. Hopefully that's obvious, but it's nice that they actually try to lay that out for you clearly in the opening lines. This is something that has happened many times. It's going to happen many, many more times. It's an eternal human story. So then we get into the first scene. So in the first scene, we zoom in and we see this house, and the narrator says something like, Peter Pan came to this house because there were people in it who believed in Peter Pan. So it sets up the story there that there are children in here that still believe in Peter Pan, that still need to integrate these lessons. So as we zoom in, we see the mother and the father, and we see the kids playing. Now, to reference back to me playing at my grandma's house as a kid, that was a place where I could let my mind run free. And growing up as a kid, I had toy swords, toy guns. I would pick up sticks and I would whittle them down to make them look like wands and pretend I'm Harry Potter. And my mind could run free there. So I'd run around and just imagine that I was playing against, other people, fictitious people in my head, as I'm sure we all did. And this is obviously reflected here in the first scene. You have these children that are playing out these stories. They're pretending to be Captain Hook. They're pretending to be Peter Pan. They're pretending to be the characters that we're about to see in the film. So the father comes into the room that the children are playing with, and he's mad because I don't even know what this chess piece thing is called, but the children have drawn a map on it, and he's very upset about it because he's going out, I assume, to some sort of opera or some sort of event with his wife, and he immediately starts to blame Wendy, of all people, because he knows that Wendy is the one that likes stories. She's obsessed with storytelling. She's constantly telling her younger siblings stories. So he blames her and he tells her, you need to get your own room. You need to stop telling these kids stories so they draw maps on my whatever that thing's called. If I can find what it's called, I'll put it up on screen. But he gets mad at Wendy, tells her that she needs her own room. This is that kind of first step to pushing her out the door, to pushing her into the unknown, to pushing her into, integrating herself and the journey that she's about to go on. So then the father trips and falls. And of course he falls, I think, over the dog, Nana. And the whole family kind of rush. They're like, "Oh, are you okay?" And the father looks up as if it's him that they're concerned about, but they're not. They're concerned about the dog. Everybody rushes to the dog first, and this obviously upsets the father. So he throws Nana out, and he tells Nana that these kids need to grow up. They can't have this, big teddy bear of a dog around with them all the time, making them feel safe. These kids need to grow up. So the dog can't sleep in their room anymore. So then Mother decides to put the kids to bed, and as she does this, she goes to lock the window. As she does that, Wendy says, "Don't lock the window. Peter Pan might come back." So obviously she's living in this fantasy realm. She says that she's found something of his that he might want back, which is his shadow, which kind of sets up the whole story. Peter Pan is missing his shadow. He hasn't integrated his shadow. So that we kind of set up his journey here as well. So Wendy's conflict here reflects the hero's journey's beginning. She's on the cusp of adulthood, grappling with the call to responsibility. And then the parents leave the house, they go on their little date, and we get into the second scene, which is Peter Pan's arrival and the flight to Neverland. So then we see Peter Pan arrive with his companion Tinkerbell, and they start searching for Peter Pan's shadow in the nursery. Eventually they find it, and Peter Pan is chasing his shadow around the room, showing that he doesn't have it integrated, and he tries to glue it onto his feet. And then Wendy comes out, and she tries sewing it to his feet. She says, "No, you have to sew your shadow to your feet." So this kind of symbolizes that both Wendy and Peter Pan have no idea how to integrate their shadow. It's kind of a cool little illusion there. Wendy then tells Peter Pan that she can no longer tell stories, that she has to grow up tomorrow, which is, again, it's kind of a little funny thing that's thrown in there. I have to grow up tomorrow. Kids sometimes think this, right? Like first day of grade 1 or something, or they have some sort of mark in their head. Like the day I turn 18, I'm expected to be an adult. That's not how it goes. I'm 24 and I still don't feel like an adult sometimes. So it's just funny that she says, like, I have to become a grown-up tomorrow. I can't do this anymore. And then Peter Pan tells her, "Well, let's just fly away to Neverland and never grow up." And that seems like a good idea to most kids, which is why these children go on this adventure. Now, there's another interesting moment here in the first scene where Wendy tries to give Peter a kiss, but Tinkerbell doesn't allow it. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about Tinkerbell and what she represents later in the film, but just mark this point because Tinkerbell is extremely jealous. She doesn't want anybody touching Peter Pan. She wants him all for herself, which is weird when you start to realize what Tinkerbell represents, but Wendy doesn't get her kiss here. She gets shoved away, and then Peter Pan tells the kids, "We need to fly." The children don't know how to fly, so he tells them to think happy thoughts at first, and then he goes, "Oh, right, you guys need pixie dust." So then he takes Tinkerbell and uses her like a salt shaker, gets pixie dust all over the children, and now suddenly they can all fly. So they all fly out of the window, and they're whisked away to Neverland. So a couple more words on this second scene because it's a very interesting scene. So Peter Pan's arrival symbolizes the intrusion of the unconscious into the conscious mind, an invitation to the fantastical and unknown. Peter Pan invites the children to escape the constraints of reality by flying, symbolizing the flight into fantasy or detachment from the real world and its responsibilities. This is akin to what Carl Jung might call a retreat from the demands of conscious integration, refusing to ground oneself in reality and responsibility. Flying can also symbolize transcending the mundane, but without groundedness. It risks becoming escapism. So this second scene does a great job of commenting on kind of problems that are happening today, which I find that there are a lot of people today that spend too much time in Fantasyland, which is unfortunate. And, Fantasyland keeps getting better and better with VR and, better films, more immersive films. Video games are getting better and better and better. I'm the first one here that will admit it, that when GTA 6 comes out, I'm probably going to lose my life for a year. I'll probably just be playing that for a full year. But I'm going to try not to because, these fantasies, they get more and more powerful every year. And people spend more and more time in fantasy realm, in Neverland, and they don't ground themselves, right? They don't go on that process of integration. And it's sad to see, but I hope with maybe watching a video like this to help connect you to the film, or just going back and rewatching Peter Pan, hopefully some people pick up on this idea that it's not good to stay in Fantasyland all the time. It's not a positive thing, and I'll detail that out more as we go through this analysis. But let's move on to the third scene. So we zoom in on Captain Hook's ship, and we meet the pirates, and Smee, Hook's first mate, and an absolute suck-up that none of the other pirates like, by the way. All the other pirates on the ship do not like Smee because he's a kiss-ass and he's kind of a teacher's pet. Sort of similar to, like I said before, Harry Potter, how you have Wormtail and you have Voldemort, right? None of the other Death Eaters really like Wormtail because he's kind of that suck-up one. He's always, pulling at the coattails of Voldemort, and he's right there next to him, and he's the kiss-ass, right? So that's what Smee is in this film. Hook plans to search for Pan amongst the natives. He hears a pirate singing above a sail and decides to shoot him and kill him just for the annoyance. So this is quite a crazy scene. They don't show the guy die and get shot, but Captain Hook, straight up, the second that we meet him, he hears one of his own crew members, one of the guys a part of his own crew, singing above on one of the lookout posts, and he shoots him. He just kills him straight up just for being annoying. So this shows you just how much of a temper Captain Hook has throughout this film. And it'll pop up more and more, but Captain Hook is quite off the rails. Hook and Smee then hear the ticking of the clock from the crocodile that took Hook's hand. And in this moment, Hook appears to be more of a coward than anybody on the ship. He jumps into Smee's arms, and he's telling him, you deal with it, I don't want to deal with the crocodile. So we see just how much of a coward Hook really is under all of that bravado of being this angry, tyrannical leader. Smee then shoos the crocodile away and tells Hook that he needs a shave. Smee can't do this properly and ends up shaving a seagull's butt instead. So this is just a little comedic scene that's thrown in there, and it's scenes like this on why I think Smee's my favorite character. It's just a really funny comedic scene, and the guy who plays Smee is, I think I said this earlier, is I think the same actor that does the White Rabbit in Alice in Wonderland, and I love the White Rabbit in Alice in Wonderland too. That's probably my favorite character in that one, although there's so many great characters in Alice in Wonderland, from the Cheshire Cat to the Mad Hatter. It's hard to pick one, but I absolutely love Smee in this scene. He's really funny. Hook then spots Peter Pan and the children in the sky and starts to shoot at them, which is crazy. Captain Hook just sees these children flying in the sky, and his immediate thought is shoot the children, which again just shows you how evil Captain Hook really is. Captain Hook's ship is the domain of chaos and conflict. Hook, as the Shadow, is both an external threat and an internal one. He reflects what Peter fears becoming: an adult consumed by obsession and bitterness. The ticking crocodile represents time, the inevitable march towards death that Hook fears, and from which Peter Pan also tries to escape. Peter's battles with Hook is the eternal struggle with the Shadow, the parts of ourselves we do not wish to confront. So this is quite interesting because Peter Pan represents, I think, what we all feel when we don't want to grow up, when we want to be children forever, when we all feel that when we're young. We don't want to be children. And I think it's because a lot of us look at adults, and it's not even just so much the responsibility. The responsibility sucks. As a child, you don't want to have to work a job and all that stuff, right? The responsibility sucks, and cleaning up. But I think the thing that children look at and they don't want to become, this might be more subconscious, but they look at parents, sometimes, my own parents or our own parents, we look up to them and we go, damn, you hate the world, you're bitter, you're upset, you don't seem to be enjoying life much. And if that's what being an adult is, I sure as heck don't want to be that. So you want to run away from that. So that might be a big reason why a lot of children, have this problem of wanting to be children forever, wanting to exist in Neverland forever, never wanting to grow up, because the adults in their life that they do have to look up to are very bitter, very resentful. They don't really like the place that they're in life. And if that's your only role model, that's the only person to look up to is what you're going to become. You're going to try everything that you can to run away from that. So It's very, very interesting how Peter Pan and Hook are connected, but let's move on to the fourth scene now. Next up, in scene 4, we have the Lost Boys hideout scene. Now, a couple interesting things happen in this scene, the first of which is Peter Pan calls Wendy mother, which is very odd. It seems like Peter Pan can't separate the difference between a love interest and a mother, and that usually happens when somebody has a bad relationship with their mother, either one way or another, maybe an Oedipal type relationship where the mother's consuming them, or the absence of a mother might leave something like that, where a person can't fully distinguish the roles and the characteristics of a mother versus a love interest. So it might be that Peter Pan, has been missing his mom for a long time, and here comes this motherly character that can look after him a little bit, that has a little bit of a sense of responsibility, at least compared to Peter Pan. He might look up to Wendy as kind of a motherly character when, obviously, Wendy has an interest in Peter Pan. She likes him romantically, right? So Tinkerbell tells the Lost Boys to shoot down Wendy, showing her jealousy. And it's funny here because, they basically say, like, Tinkerbell, you could have killed them, and, like, that was what she was trying to do. She was literally trying to kill the children because she's jealous of Wendy and Peter Pan. Now, Tinkerbell, she represents a few interesting things. She represents this idyllic vision that maybe men have of women, especially in early adulthood, especially in adolescent years. Men tend to look at women with this idealistic perspective, like they want this 10 out of 10, absolutely stunning, gorgeous, beautiful woman, and they want her to be a virgin, and they want her to have all these, qualities that no woman has all of those. That just doesn't exist, right? So it's this kind of like fictitious idea of what a woman should be. And I think that comes about when you only exist in the fantasy realm, when you only engage with women in a fantastical way, when there's no real women in your life. So you can see this in the real world, right? Tinkerbell represents, the OnlyFans and corn industry, right? All of that stuff is not real. It's fake. It's fake love. It's fake connection. It's even fake sexual interactions, right? It's fake. If anybody here were to watch videos like that and then go home to their significant other and try any of that stuff, they'd be like, what the heck are you trying to do right now? This is insane, right? So it's fictitious. It's not real. It's fantastical. Anyways, I hope that makes sense there. And then Peter scolds Tinkerbell and tells her that she could have killed the children. And Tinkerbell, like I said, doesn't really care. That was kind of her goal. So she's banished. She's banished for life, Peter Pan says at first, which is kind of a rash thing to say, especially because, Tinkerbell's your girl, kind of. And he says, okay, then maybe just for a week. So he instantly shifts down to a week. So he goes from life to a week, showing these drastic swings, meaning he doesn't really feel the effect, right? And he's kind of running away from time, so he's not really thinking about time very seriously. So he can throw something out there like, you're banned for life, and then switch it instantly to a week the next second later. Anyways, Peter Pan then sends John, Michael, and the Lost Boys to hunt Indians. And he takes Wendy to the mermaids. So the group diverges here. So we get the boys going off to the Indians, and we get, Wendy and Peter Pan going off to see the mermaids. So the hideout symbolizes the retreat from reality into a protected inner world, one where rules are suspended and the dangers of the outside world do not penetrate. Wendy's arrival signals a new dynamic. She brings with her the potential for growth, responsibility, and the establishment of structure. Wendy's arrival signals a new dynamic. She brings with her the potential for growth, responsibility, and the establishment of structure, though Peter initially resists this. So, in the fifth scene, we have the Indian camp and the capturing of Tiger Lily. So the boys start by marching into the forest, singing a song, following the leader. We're following the leader, the leader. You guys probably know it. You probably sung it growing up, too. Maybe you sung it growing up and didn't even know where it was from, but it's from this film. So they march into the forest, singing Following the Leader, and then they stumble upon these tracks, which is just two little footsteps in the sand. And I think John says something like, ooh, look, Blackfoot tracks. And it's kind of an insensitive joke, but I laughed when I heard it, I can't lie. But he starts laying out a strategy now that he knows that they're on to the tracks. They got the scent of them, right? So they start devising the strategy of encircling. And as this is happening, little Michael runs out. He's exploratory, right? He doesn't have any fear at all, right? As we said earlier. And he finds a tree that keeps following him. And then he looks under the tree and he sees some feet. So then he runs back to the group and he's trying to poke his head in. He's trying to tell everybody, like, hey, the Indians are here. Like, they're coming after us. And of course, being the youngest, nobody wants to talk to him. He's kind of pushed out of the group, which happens in real life. Usually the youngest kid is the one that's bullied or kicked out or not picked on the team, right? It's just kind of how it goes. But then as they're talking about encircling the Indians encircle them, hiding in the trees, and then they capture the boys. So then they bring them back to the Indian camp. So back at the camp, the boys are tied up, and the big chief and the Lost Boys kind of reveal that this is just a game. That sometimes the Indians catch the Lost Boys, and sometimes the Lost Boys catch the Indians, and they always release each other. But this time, the chief's not releasing them. He's changing his mind, and it's because Tiger Lily has been stolen, and he thinks the Lost Boys did it. So he's telling them, you guys either find Tiger Lily by midnight, or whenever it is, whenever the deadline is, and then if you don't, I'm going to turn you into steaks. I'm going to cook you alive. So these early Disney films, man, they're darker than people remember. And yeah, of course, this scene is a little bit insensitive, obviously, as this film was made in 1953. So we have to take that into consideration. But the analysis for this scene is quite interesting. So the kidnapping of Tiger Lily symbolizes the tension between chaos and order, with Peter representing the forces that protect the sacred and noble aspects of the unconscious, while Hook, representing the shadow, attempts to dominate and destroy. This scene also reflects the masculine hero's journey to rescue and integrate these untamed aspects of the self. So you see, Peter Pan and Hook are kind of two opposite forces fighting over Tiger Lily at this point, which is, like I just said, they're the unconscious noble traits. Whereas Peter Pan wants to save them and integrate them, Hook wants to capture them, keep them repressed, maybe even destroy them. So interesting how that plays out in this scene. So moving on, now that we've concluded the fifth scene, we have the sixth scene, which is a very short scene, but it's the Mermaid Lagoon scene. So Peter Pan and Wendy pull up on Mermaid Lagoon. They see these beautiful mermaids. You know, Wendy's infatuated by them. They're all very pretty, but they're all obsessed with vanity. We see instantly that these mermaids are kind of lounging around, admiring their own beauty, looking at themselves in the lake, looking at their reflection. And, you know, Peter Pan shows up and they all flock to him. They want to hear about his adventures. They're obsessed with Peter Pan. And this is a weird scene because these characters are, again, fictitious. They're fantastical characters. They're similar to Tinkerbell. They represent kind of the same thing. And Peter Pan is obviously telling his stories to them. You can almost imagine this like how a young kid who maybe, you know, doesn't talk to a lot of girls, and, you know, maybe some of his friends are starting to talk to girls, you know, he might start making up fantasy versions of the women that he might, you know, want to have in his life. So he might start thinking of maybe not mermaids, just maybe fake girlfriends, imaginary girlfriends. I might not be the only person who's had an imaginary girlfriend as a child. I'm sure many of you guys have as well. Maybe not imaginary girlfriends, maybe just imaginary friends, but to each his own, I guess. But obsessed with vanity, these mermaids are kind of jealous when Wendy shows up. They see a real girl, they see a real woman, right? And they start to get jealous immediately. So they start saying that they want to throw her in the water. And they literally say in the film, like, you can go back and watch this film, I'm not making this up, they literally say that they were trying to drown her. They were literally trying to kill Wendy because they were jealous of her. So, very, very dark scene, actually, the mermaid scene. And just as this is happening, just as they're just about to drown Wendy, and she picks up a Kong shell, about to smash them over the heads with it, they spot Captain Hook. And Captain Hook is being pursued, of course, by the crocodile. He's always being pursued by death and Father Time. But they've captured Tiger Lily, Hook and Smee. So they're carrying her away to Skull Rock. And Peter Pan kind of puts this together, and he says, we have to go save Tiger Lily. But this mermaid scene is very, very interesting. So the mermaids represent the allure of the unconscious and the feminine energy that, if not properly integrated, can become destructive. Peter's interaction with them reveals his lack of full awareness. He is intrigued by them, but unaware of the potential danger of being submerged in their world. This symbolizes the temptation to lose oneself in the emotional or irrational aspects of life without developing maturity. So again, that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier of how he has these fantastical versions of women in his head, which are the mermaids, but he doesn't realize how dangerous they are, that they will drag him down beneath the waters with them if they got the chance. So very, very dark scene, but it's a very quick scene. This scene only lasts like about maybe a minute, and then we're on to the next one. So let's move on to scene 7. So in scene 7, we pull up on Skull Rock, and we get this beautiful shot here of Peter Pan and Wendy overlooking Captain Hook interrogating Tiger Lily, and he's basically giving her a deal. He's saying, I will give you your freedom. You can leave here fine, and I won't murder you if you tell me where Peter Pan and the Lost Boys hide out. And Tiger Lily, who doesn't say a word throughout the entire film, just kind of shakes her head, and she's like, no, I'm not giving up this information. So instantly, Hook's tempers flare up again. Like, he gets super enraged. His face turns red. He's super angry at Tiger Lily. He wants to know where Peter Pan is. And then this is when Peter Pan starts to play his tricks. The little trickster comes out here. So first, he kind of lures Hook away by echoing in the cave, using his hat as kind of to augment his voice and echo throughout the cave. He kind of makes himself sound like an evil spirit, and Smee and Hook start to get scared, so they separate for a minute, and Hook's going to look for it. He's like, where is this voice coming from? Because he's a little bit more skeptical. Just when Hook is far enough away from Smee, Peter Pan then starts to pretend that he's Captain Hook, and he starts to talk to Smee, saying, let go of Tiger Lily, let her run free, this is my order. And Smee, of course, he doesn't know any better because this guy, he sounds like Captain Hook right now. So he's like, okay. He starts to listen to Captain Hook. He starts to row away and take Tiger Lily with him, and then Hook spots Smee, and he's like, what are you doing? Like, get back there. And then as Smee goes back, Peter Pan again starts to fake Captain Hook's voice, but this time he's overused his tricks. You can't reuse a trick because the old wily veteran, which is Captain Hook, will catch on to that. And he catches on to it, and he sneaks up on Peter Pan. And if it weren't for Wendy, saying something last minute here, Peter Pan would have lost his head. He would have been dead right there. So Wendy kind of saves Peter Pan here, and then Peter Pan basically just toys with Captain Hook in a very comical fight, at the end of which, Captain Hook kind of falls. He falls off of a cliff, kind of in a Looney Tunes way, and then the crocodile's down there, of course, so he's flinging around with the crocodile, trying not to land in its jaws. I think he goes inside of the crocodile, then comes out of it at another point, and he barely escapes with his life with that crocodile coming after him. So the whole fight, though, the whole time Peter Pan and Hook are fighting each other, Peter Pan's just toying with him. It's kind of silly because Peter Pan can fly, but Captain Hook can't fly. So Peter Pan, even though he has this little dagger compared to Captain Hook's big sword, just with the ability of flight, which is that childhood, imagination and that childhood wonder that Peter Pan has that Captain Hook's, repressed or killed in himself, just because he has that, he's able to fly and toy with Captain Hook. So really the fight's not even remotely close. He's just playing around with Captain Hook, pulling his hat over his head, and it's not close because Captain Hook's completely out of his element. He's old, he's washed up, and he doesn't have any spark in him. So he's a little bit slow and sluggish. So anyways, Captain Hook barely escapes with his life, and Peter Pan saves Tiger Lily. This scene marks Peter's moment of heroic action, where he rescues Tiger Lily and earns the respect of the natives. This victory over Hook, the Shadow, represents a small triumph of consciousness over chaos. However, Peter's development remains incomplete, as his heroic act still occurs within the bounds of fantasy and detachment from responsibility. So that's one thing to note. What I just said there about Peter Pan kind of toying with Captain Hook, he's playing in fantasy land. It's almost like if you play a video game that you're really good at and you put it on easy mode, or if you go on Minecraft and you're just playing on creative mode the whole time, right? It's not really that challenging, and you're not really going to learn anything. You're not going to integrate any new lessons. The only way to play Minecraft and learn something, if you want to learn how to craft, you got to play survival mode. You got to play with a little bit of difficulty. So note that, because that will come up again later towards the end of the film. Even though Peter Pan did a heroic act in saving Tiger Lily, he did it in a way where he was almost cheating in a way. So he hasn't fully integrated his shadow yet. And we will get to the next scene now, which is scene 8. So in scene 8, this is a very short scene where we go back to the ship. This is right after what just happened. Captain Hook is trying to recover. And this is what I mean by Smee kind of being more of a motherly character. He's really catering to Captain Hook here. Earlier in the film, we saw him shaving Captain Hook. Now he's just straight up like comforting him while he's sick, which is not very pirately. So it's an odd scene, but Smee eventually lets loose that Tinkerbell has been banished, that they're no longer on the same sides, Tinkerbell and Peter Pan. So Hook gets the idea of let's go capture Tinkerbell, and maybe we can use her to get at Peter Pan. So he pulls out all of the stops. He pulls out his nicest jacket. He pulls out the gold hook, and he even puts a ring on his hook. He's trying to look as good as possible, which, again, this is funny because this is only something that a shadow archetype character would think of. If you're going to convince somebody of something, what you don't do is dress up all fancy and put a bunch of gold jewelry on. That doesn't impress anybody. That only impresses you. That's the only person that's going to impress, especially if you're asking somebody for a favor. It's best not to go up there, pulling out all the stops and wearing all of your most expensive clothes and jewelry. It's probably not going to convince the other person to help you. So this is something that's completely egotistical and completely in the mind of Captain Hook. He thinks putting on a gold hook is actually going to benefit him in this conversation, which it won't, but he still is going to get his way, as we'll see here in a second. So let's move on to scene 9 now. So in scene 9, we get the famous controversial scene. Yeah. So at the Indian camp, again, I'm saying Indian because that's what's in the show, but the chief thanks Peter Pan for saving the princess, and he makes Peter an honorary chief. And then they all dance and sing together. And they start to sing this song called What Made the Red Man Red. And it's a pretty insensitive song in today's world, but yeah, they get through that, and by the end of it, Wendy's like, I am done with this. You guys are absolutely crazy. Now all the Lost Boys, even John and Michael, are now like fully, they're fully invested in the whole Indian thing. They're dressing up, they're painting their faces, they're running around with little tomahawks, and Wendy's kind of just done with it. So she starts to walk away, and at this moment, we see that Smee is now capturing Tinkerbell. So the celebration marks the momentary victory over chaos, but it is also a superficial one. In the context of Jungian psychology, it is a partial integration of the unconscious, but Peter still avoids the true challenge, integrating maturity and responsibility into his identity. The celebration is an illusion of completeness. So unfortunately, I don't have any good examples to give you guys off the top of my head right now, but there are a lot of films that give you kind of a false conclusion. And they're somewhat my favorite films. Like one that comes to mind that doesn't really exactly equate to what I'm talking about here, but in The Dark Knight, you get a false ending, right? You get that huge climactic scene. I forget, it's like either the hospital scene or something. There's like a big climax, and you could feel it when you're watching the film. And then you realize, oh no, that's not the climax. There's another climax that's coming right after this. So it's kind of a false ending. And you kind of get that here with everybody celebrating. It's like, yeah, we did it. We saved Tiger Lily. But that's actually not what we're here to do. We're here to, integrate the unconscious and to confront the shadow and to make the full integration, make the full journey. So we're not quite there yet. So we have to move on to scene 10. In scene 10, we see that we are back on Hook's ship, and Captain Hook is now toying with Tinkerbell. He plays with her emotions. He's kind of, saying like, oh, like, what are we to do? We're going to leave tomorrow. And he's kind of just making up this fake story to play with her emotions. And he brings up Wendy and how Peter and Wendy are seeming to get closer. And how are we going to get rid of Peter Pan? And how are we going to get rid of Wendy? Well, we're going to get rid of Wendy by pulling her on the ship, and we're just going to leave. And we're not going to touch a hair on Peter Pan's head. Wink. They kind of fool Tinkerbell into thinking that they're not going to do anything to Peter Pan. And then she gives them the location. She points it out on the map. And as soon as she does that, the second she points it out on the map, Captain Hook throws her in a lantern and locks her up. So you can never trust the villain. Never, never trust the villain. And now we move on to the 11th scene. So in scene 11, we are back at the Lost Boys hideout, and all of the boys are riled up. All the children are going crazy, and Wendy's a little bit jealous of Tiger Lily because she was dancing during the ceremony, and Peter Pan was looking a little interested. So Wendy is obviously jealous. Not only that, but she's starting to feel that push towards responsibility. She's seeing all these kids jump around and, they're still playing, and she's like, come on, like, it's time for bed. Like, we've had a long day. I'm not feeling too good about this Tiger Lily situation, so can we calm down? Can we go to bed? And she starts to settle the children down. She starts to sing for them, which is a really cool moment here because she tells the kids that everybody needs a mother. And some of the kids don't remember their mothers. Even I think it was either John or Michael. I can't remember right now. But one of them is like, they don't even remember what their mother looks like. They're starting to think Wendy's the mother now. So they're starting to dissociate a bit. And the Lost Boys, they can't even remember what their mothers look like. So Wendy starts singing this song, and she kind of lulls the children to bed. And just as these kids are about to fall asleep, it looks like the night's over, we see from outside of the hideout that Captain Hook and all of his pirates are closing in. They're closing in on the Lost Boys hideout. So some of the pirates are moved by Wendy singing. You can see actually most of them, basically all of them except for Captain Hook, are moved by this little girl singing. They're all crying, and I think Smee lifts up his shirt at some point, and he's got like a mom tattoo on his chest. So all these pirates are moved by it, but Captain Hook is not. He's like, everybody, shh, like we got to take these people out. So after the song has concluded, all of the children kind of agree, like, we all want to go home now. We all want to see our moms again. Everybody's got mommy fever now that Wendy sung to them. And this is a weird scene, too, because Peter Pan dismisses them all. He doesn't want to go with them. He wants to stay in Neverland. He's the most sold on that idea. And he says something here that sounds a lot like Captain Hook. You get a glimpse here. It almost even sounds like Captain Hook when he says it. He almost says it in a way, the same way that the Captain Hook voice actor was delivering his lines throughout the film. He says, if you go and you grow up, you can never come back. Never. He writes it off, which, one, is not true. If you grow up, you can still be childish. I've met many adults who could still, play and have fun and be childish, and they still have that childlike aspect integrated. They haven't completely blocked that out or repressed it. But that's not actually true. You can come back to your childlike ways. You can always come back to Neverland. You just don't want to stay there forever. But Peter Pan, he says you can never come back, and he's very strict about that. And he thinks that once you go, that's what he believes. Like, once you go, you're never going to be able to come back. They're going to change you, and you're going to become something different. This is what children think, right? They think we're going to grow up, and then we're going to get responsibility put on us, and then we're going to turn into something different. We're going to turn bitter and resentful and angry like Captain Hook, and we don't want that. So this is all expressed in, Peter Pan not wanting them to leave. And just as Wendy and the Lost Boys step out, they are captured by Captain Hook. And Peter Pan, staying in the hideout, doesn't hear any of this. So they're all captured, brought away, and Captain Hook lowers down a present for Peter Pan. Probably not a good present, actually. We'll see here in a moment. It's definitely not a good present. So that concludes the 11th scene. The capture symbolizes the return of the shadow. Hook represents the forces that Peter has tried to evade. Wendy's role as protector begins to emerge more fully, foreshadowing her ultimate decision to leave Neverland and embrace growth, while Peter continues to resist. So next up, in scene 12, we have the rescue and the battle on the ship. So this is the climax of the film. And on the ship, we see that all the children are tied up, and Hook is giving them two options. He says you can either join the crew or walk the plank, which is not much of an option. But the children all rush to join up because they all want to be pirates, right? We saw that from the first scene of the film. They were playing as Captain Hook and Peter Pan. They've always wanted to be pirates. Now they get the chance to do it, and they don't seem to have any better option, so they all want to sign up. Wendy, however, chimes in, and she thinks Peter Pan will still save them. And kind of, Hook and Smee are laughing at this, like, really, Peter Pan's going to save these people? Like, we just dealt with that guy. That guy's not going to be an issue anymore. Hook then lets slip that the present that he left for Peter Pan was actually a bomb that was supposed to go off at 6 o'clock. And it's almost that time. So Tinkerbell, hearing this from the lantern, knocks the lantern over and quickly rushes away to go save Peter Pan. Hook then starts to count down the seconds, kind of going, okay, Peter Pan's about to die. You're about to see him blow up off the island. And just before the bomb is about to blow up, Tinkerbell gets back to Peter Pan, and she tells him, this is a bomb, it's going to blow up, this is what's happening. She kind of lets loose all the information, and then Peter Pan's caught up and he's just saved by the explosion just before it's about to happen. Peter Pan then saves Tinkerbell from the rubble, and back on the ship, everybody believes Peter Pan to be dead, sadly. So Wendy's up first. They put up Wendy to walk the plank, and she gets up there and she jumps. She actually takes a leap of faith and jumps, but Peter Pan swoops in at the last second and saves Wendy. They're all expecting a splash, and nobody hears a splash, so they go, well, that's weird. And then Captain Hook goes, you want to hear a splash, and he takes one of his own men and throws him overboard for absolutely no reason. Let's just kill another one of my members for no reason. Then the Lost Boys and everybody else is freed by Peter Pan. He kind of comes up to the ship, frees the Lost Boys, and now there's an all-out battle on the ship. The Lost Boys are fighting the pirates, while Pan fights Hook. At first, it's looking like the same fight as before, where Pan is kind of, flying around, toying with Captain Hook. There's not really much Captain Hook can do. And then towards the end, Pan finally agrees to face Hook man to man. He says, I won't fly away this time. And, Hook is like, I don't believe you, but let's see. So immediately he takes a cheap shot at Peter Pan. Peter Pan almost falls off of the beam immediately, just gets back on. They start fighting again, and, Captain Hook's going all out. He's like, this is my chance to beat this kid. And just when it looks like Peter Pan's been defeated, at the last second, he takes the pirate flag, the skull, which represents death, from behind Captain Hook, and he wraps it around him. And that defeats Captain Hook. At the last second, though, Captain Hook kind of gets out, and he's going for one last swing, and he falls off, and he falls into the ocean where, obviously, the crocodile is waiting. Father Time, death is waiting. We're getting all this symbolism at once, right, with the flag being wrapped around Hook, and now he's falling into the abyss, and now he's there with the crocodile, which also represents death, and the ticking clock, which represents, time. It's time for Captain Hook. It's time for his story to close. So he's in the water fighting with the crocodile. It's not going too well. He ends up swimming away, and the crocodile's chasing him, and the pirates are chasing the crocodile. So that kind of ends that story. Peter Pan finally garnishes the courage to stand up to Captain Hook, to face him like a man, to not fly away, to not use any tricks, to not cheat, and to fight him one-on-one. And he wins. He wins honestly, which is good for Peter Pan. This battle is a symbolic confrontation with death. Hook, chased by the crocodile, Time, represents the inevitable march towards mortality. Peter's victory is the temporary triumph of eternal youth over the shadow, but it is a hollow victory. By defeating Hook, Peter remains stuck in Neverland, refusing to integrate adulthood and responsibility. His escape from time is also his greatest limitation. So Peter Pan, at the end of the day, wins. He overcomes Captain Hook, but like I just read there, it's kind of a bittersweet victory because he does stay in Neverland. He never does grow up. He never does come home. So, like I said in the beginning, he's a good character, but he's also a negative character in some ways. There's positive and negative aspects to Peter Pan, but in the end, the good always wins. And Peter Pan, he says, we're going to set sail now, and Wendy's a little bit concerned. After the battle's done, she's like, where are we setting sail to now? I want to go home. And Peter Pan says London, which relieves everybody, and Wendy tells the rest of the children, we're going home now. So the ship turns gold, kind of signifying that, victory's been achieved, the integration's been achieved, the journey's complete, and they fly away back to London. Back home, the parents are just arriving back, and it seems that the father has changed his mind about Wendy growing up and getting her own room. He thinks, okay, maybe I was a little bit harsh. Maybe we'll give her a little bit more time to spend with her siblings. Maybe we don't have to do this just yet. But they get up to her room, and they see that Wendy's bed is empty. But then they quickly glance over to the window, and she's there, kind of passed out. Wendy then immediately starts telling her parents about all the adventures that she had. She says, we finally got back. And they're like, you guys got back? We just got back. Where have you been? And, she starts telling about her fantasies, and her father's kind of sleepy at this point after the show. He's like, I don't really have time for this. But she tells her father that she's ready to grow up now, which is kind of a shock to him. He's like, oh, well, that's good news. Glad you came to that conclusion. So at the very end of the film, in the last couple shots, we get an absolutely gorgeous ending. This is like the star on the tree. It's a perfect ending, the cherry on top of the sundae. Wendy looks out and she sees a ship in the clouds that looks just like the Jolly Roger. And she points to it, and both of her parents see it, and they're stunned. And her father says something like he has a strange feeling that he's seen that ship before, a long time ago when he was a child. And it's just a perfect way to conclude the whole film, because you get this sense that the father has already gone through this journey. He's already done the whole Peter Pan thing. You know, he's already done that. And it's cool. It's a really, really cool ending. So Wendy's return to London symbolizes the completion of her psychological journey. She chooses reality, structure, and responsibility over the endless play of Neverland. Peter's refusal to accompany her reflects the eternal tension between the desire to remain free of responsibility and the necessity of growth. Peter, as the pure Eternus, represents the ideal of youth and freedom, but one that is ultimately unsustainable in the real world. So yeah, the story obviously ends on a positive note. A little bit bittersweet for Peter Pan. You know, he still exists in Neverland, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe he exists there so that the next children that go on an adventure to Neverland can learn from him and have the same experience, right? So that's kind of the sense that I get from the ending there, with the father saying that he's seen that ship before, that this is a reoccurring story, and it reflects the opening lines of the film, right? This is a story that has happened many times before, and this time it's happening in London. So very, very cool way to end the film. I think this film is absolutely brilliant, despite some of the more controversial scenes, I guess, with the Indians. Again, I apologize if I offended anybody by calling the characters in the films Indians. I know that they are indigenous or First Nations peoples, but I just wanted to stay consistent to what's in the film. So absolutely beautiful film. Some of my concluding thoughts: I think that this is probably one of the best stories of growing up and integrating the shadow and confronting it and, you know, accepting responsibility in life. I think this is one of the best stories I've ever seen when it comes to that. And it's a very, very deep story. And it mirrors a lot of the same ideas in Pinocchio. Pinocchio is basically the same story, just done in a different way. But Pinocchio definitely has a lot of mirroring themes. And I think both films are absolutely gorgeous. I love both of them. I love these old Disney films. I love breaking them down for you guys. I hope today I was able to provide you guys with a deeper connection to this film. And hopefully I inspired you guys to go rewatch it, because these old Disney films, they slap. They are great. They are absolutely fantastic. I love them all. Yeah, I'm not too sure which one I want to cover next. I was thinking of doing Sleeping Beauty. Or not Sleeping Beauty. We've already done that one. I was thinking of doing Beauty and the Beast. My apologies. Beauty and the Beast is on my schedule. I also want to do The Prince of Egypt. That's like one of the most beautiful animated films ever, and I've been doing a lot of religious videos on my channel recently, so I might do Prince of Egypt. I might do Cinderella. There's been a couple Disney films that I definitely want to cover. There's a few out there. But if you guys want me to make the shift now that I've done 5 Disney films, if you guys want me to stop there and do a shift over to live action films and maybe cover something like The Matrix or Inception or 2001: A Space Odyssey or Everything Everywhere All at Once, you know, as long as it's a deep film, a conceptual film, or a psychological film, or just a film with strong archetypes and strong symbolism, I will take a look at it and I will provide you guys a film analysis video for it, because I love doing these videos. These are my most favorite videos to do on my channel. I learned so much in doing them. Now I feel like I know Peter Pan, Sleeping Beauty, Alice, and all those films that I've covered. I feel like I know them, like line for line, scene by scene, frame by frame. I feel so connected to them now, and I hope you guys feel more connected to them too. I love doing these videos. Unfortunately, it took me a long time to put out this video since my last film analysis video, because these videos do take a long time to make. I have to go through the film multiple times. I have to consult with ChatGPT. I have to consult with books that I've read, psychology books. I have to watch the film back multiple times, grab all the stills. It takes a lot of effort to make these videos, and I'm not complaining because, like I said, it's my favorite thing to do in life. But if you guys want to see more of these videos, definitely like, share, subscribe, share this with some of your friends. It helps me a lot, and I could definitely provide you guys with more of these videos if I'm able to do this full time in the future. But thank you guys so much for watching. As always, it means the absolute world to me. Thank you guys so much. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.